All right, good evening, persons of quality. It is March 4th, 2024. Here's your lesson on Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So this is the lesson I had promised. I'm going to work on it today. I'm going to tweak it tomorrow, and then I'll make it available for you as we approach conferences. Okay, so it gives you plenty of things that you're able to do. So far we have talked about William Blake, we've talked about William Wordsworth, and now Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Remember that Blake is an outlier. Remember that Wordsworth and Coleridge are both called lake poets because of the nature elements in their poetry. So it gives you something certainly that you can attend to or look for as far as detail is going to go. Now, just realized that I had a shirt on the back of my chair. I noticed because I wanted you to pay attention to the portrait over my right hand shoulder. Of course, if you pay attention as I move my finger, there it is. So that's downtown. Certainly would help you come up with a little bit of bonus if you can identify what that church is. So let's take a look. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who was he? Now, we spent some time reading the book about what's going on with Wordsworth and sort of what his motivations are. So when you look at Coleridge in his day, he was viewed as a genius, but he had no addiction to opium. Always what makes him stand out in my mind is the fact that he was a genius, but they always mention that he had an opium addiction. As a matter of fact, the poem Kubla Khan was supposed to come out of a drug-induced dream. Now, for the most part, that doesn't matter, other than you have to remember that I told you that the Romantics lived fast and died young. So that's incredibly, I think, important overall. Now, my notes talk about his early life and education. I think for the sake of lecture, I'm going to skip that over, and I want to talk about sort of his life as a writer. Some of this is going to be redundant for us, but still, it's going to make some sense as we move forward. Now, I am going to be looking at my notes. So if I turn my head like this, it's because I'm looking at my notes. See? But I made the mistake last time of putting it in front of the microphone, and that got wonky. So I don't want to do that. So if we take a look at Samuel Taylor Coleridge, we know he was born in 1772. The lyrical ballads were published, if you remember, 1798. So he had a good amount of time that he could spend working on sort of his creative craft, if you will. So I think that's important. So we know that he grew up. We know that he was a student at Jesus College at Cambridge. Now, I went to Oxford for a term where I got to study overseas. Cambridge is in the other part of England. It's sort of the other major college that these romantics were exposed to. So he went to Jesus College, Cambridge in 1791. He wanted to be a clergyman. That stuff kind of didn't work out for him. He began writing poetry at the same time. So he's got a lot going on as this part of his life was moving. Wasn't good at school. He was such a free spirit that he was unsuccessful sitting in class. And he also found himself incredibly deep in debt. And at that time, if you were in debt, there were far more significant and rapid consequences for being in debt. He enlisted in the military under a false name. Hated it. Not a military guy, kind of guy at all. And he got discharged. So that part of his career ended. My notes say that he met Robert Southey. For our study this year at U of D, we're not going to be talking about Robert Southey as a character or as an author. But what we do know is that he's a radical. Robert Southey was. And when you look at the work of Coleridge, he too was considered a radical poet. So I think that's very important. as far as our ideas go. If we move into the sort of the second phase of this, as a writer, Coleridge was a very interesting guy. He got married, as everybody was expected to do. He became a lecturer in Bristol because he was so very intelligent. He also started a newspaper called The Watchman. Little interesting fact is that he's sort of a jack of all trades, and he dabbles in all these kinds of different things. The periodical magazine called The Watchman was unsuccessful, so that didn't last very long. He had a few poems published in a collection that he did with Wordsworth and William Lamb. Now, that's sort of like the lyrical ballads, and I just find it interesting that when we look at Coleridge's production, he really developed through his relationship with William Wordsworth and William Lamb. So I think, their names, they'll be important as you move forward. If we cover them this year at U of D, awesome. If we don't, you'll have exposure in the future. The poem, The Aeolian Harp, which we covered in class, the one to my pensive Sarah, that was included in this production of poetry that Coleridge put together. I want you to kind of pay attention to this because I'll talk about it a little bit later. Coleridge is known for his conversational poems, and I'll get to that in a moment, but he is known for that particular grouping of poems, and that'll be in my notes as we get a little bit further. Moving just a little bit more into the background, as Wordsworth and Coleridge spent more and more time together, they began collaborating, and this is what produced the 1798 lyrical ballads. We've come back to this 3 or 4 times as a concept. So the lyrical ballads is now considered the first publication of British Romanticism. So that's the starting point. Again, not the first time we've talked about it, but again, it's in your notes. But like any major work, when the lyrical ballads were first published, they were not received well because they changed everything. So because they changed everything, people didn't like it. Romanticism is about challenging the norm. So the audiences didn't like the changes that Wordsworth and Coleridge kind of came up with. So this causes Wordsworth to move to Germany and kind of grow his career off on his own, writing essays, publishing criticism, those kinds of things. Later on in life, Coleridge's relationship with Wordsworth became strained. They sort of went their different ways. This is when Coleridge wrote his elements or his pieces of literary criticism, and I thought that was important. The criticism was called Biographia Literaria. Biographia, Biographia, Literaria, Literaria. That's important because he's really known for his criticism as well. I was going to say poetry, but it's his criticism. So I think that's very important. Sort of as background information for Coleridge. It supports the things that we had in our book, and I think that's going to be important for us. This next segment, sort of the third movement of this particular lecture, is the conversational poems. So Coleridge originally published his first conversation poem, The Aeolian Harp, under the title Effusion 35. XXV, 3 of them. So it's called Effusion 35. Now, just geeky, one of those things that shows up on a quiz, that kind of an idea. He composed the poem with his soon-to-be wife, Sarah Fricker. Name doesn't matter other than, remember in the poem, it's to my pensive Sarah, or oh my pensive Sarah in that first line. Here's why. It was his soon-to-be wife. And in that poem, he espouses or supports many of the ideals of pantisocracy, Pantisocracy, pantisocracy. Maybe look that up as an idea for Wednesday when you come in before parent-teacher conferences. He'd go on to write other conversational poems, including this Lime Tree Bower, My Prison, which is in your anthology, Frost at Midnight, which we've now covered as an idea, and then Ode to a Nightingale, which is going to be the piece we will cover after Rime of the Ancient Mariner and our last Coleridge piece. So I think that's going to be, again, directionality for where we're going. So if we look at the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, here at 11 minutes, Coleridge and Wordsworth wrote and published the lyrical ballads in 1798. Again, the publication marked the birth of the Romantic movement. None of this is outside of your purview. You know this. So this epic poem that we are through or into part 2 of as of the recording of this video, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, appeared in that collaborative work. So, Rime of the Ancient Mariner appeared in the lyrical ballads of 1798. Coleridge and Wordsworth. And I forgot about the fact that Wordsworth played a role in putting together the 7-part structure of this poem. It tells the tale of a ship's crew that is cursed after one of the sailors kills the albatross. Now, today in class, we talked about much of that symbolism in part 1. For example, the mast is a cross, the fact that the bird white perches on that cross for Vespers 9, for 9 days of prayer. Again, that absolutely makes sense. Remember, the albatross is considered a good omen, so upon the shooting of the albatross, the boat becomes cursed. That curse allows us to go deeper into the larger ideas of the poem. And again, I think that's incredibly significant for us as an idea. Okay, if we take a look at Samuel Taylor Coleridge's, STC's legacy, today we see Coleridge mainly as a primary figure of the Romantic movement. The conversation poems changed the way that people saw poetry. So that's excellent. That's a question on the test. Using 2, maybe 3 of the conversational poems, discuss how Coleridge changed sort of the scope and focus of literature. Because no longer did poems have to be rigid and formal, like the sonnet. So everything here is linear for me. We did the sonnet so we could look at structure. Now we can look at Coleridge and say he doesn't follow that particular structure. So the poetry of Coleridge, the conversational poems, provided room for poems that sounded like a casual conversation between friends. His friendship and collaboration with Wordsworth produced the first real work of the Romantic period. Again, your lyrical ballads. Themes of nature, human emotion, imagination, and creativity. Notice these are very close to your 5 eyes. So it would be in your best interest to connect all of the 5 eyes to this, to write down themes of nature, human emotion, imagination, and creativity as you look at the different works that we are covering. I think that's relatively straightforward as a larger concept. So use that as a way to walk through what you have for background for Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Now, I'm at the 14-minute mark, and I think that's of great value. What I do want to do here at the end of this particular video is to just recap what we did today in part 1 of Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner is a long poem. Uh, what's it really about? Lots of different things. The story presented in the poem is narrated by a sailor who is compelled to tell his tale to certain people he encounters. We talked about that in class. Why the wedding guest? Why the sacramental journey? The ship on which the mariner works experiences good fortune until the mariner shoots a friendly albatross with his crossbow. And again, I emphasize it that way. Crossbow. Don't have to say it like that, but like the mast, that's that triangle thing. I said triangle, sorry. The cross becomes important. So after this occurs, the ship and its crew seems cursed. Now, we know already that as the poem starts, the mariner stops one of three, and we have this discussion of what's going on. Mariner starts his tale, and he talks about how the boat, as it's traveling south, as I made a big deal about directionality, the sun came up upon the right. Sun came up upon the right as they were traveling uh, southward. No, sorry, came up upon the left. Sorry, lost my thought there. Actually, I'm playing because I want to see if you're paying attention. So they're traveling. So that becomes important. The ship encounters nasty weather. Remember, the storm blast was tyrannous and strong. It's on the right-hand page near the bottom because I can see it in my head. So that's part of it. I think again that's important. So as they encounter the storm, that becomes an important idea. They encounter snow and ice. I said, look at the color. Look at the icebergs and how those are defined and given specific colors. I said, look at how we saw this in Holy Thursday by Wordsworth, the Innocents version. And we also saw that the ice was mast high. It was huge. So again, a very foreboding atmosphere as the poem goes. Then an albatross appears in the mist. The sailor begins to feed the albatross as it flies around the ship. It ate the food it ne'er, N-E-apostrophe-E-R. It never had ate. Suddenly the ice begins to crack and the mariner steers the ship through. Now I mentioned that that occurs because the mariner's not done with his journey. He has to move further in this to be able to have sort of that out-of-body experience that begins in 2, but really kind of picks up speed in 3, 4, 5, and 6. Briefly in 2, the other sailors accuse the mariner of killing the bird that makes the breeze to blow. And again, directly out of the text. The wind stops. I said they get trapped in the doldrums, which we know is off the southern coast of Africa. Wind doesn't blow and ships often get stranded. That's where it says, water, water everywhere, and all the boards did shrink. And I kept bringing up why. Salt water. Salt water dehydrates whatever's floating in it. That's why it has to be coated in tar and oil. And then there's that famous line, like a painted ship upon a painted ocean. So again, they're frozen in time. Do not miss that metaphor, this idea of being frozen in time. And without fresh rainwater to replenish their supplies, the mariner describes the scene. It's the water, water everywhere. And very specifically, at the end of part 2, the crew has had enough. So they seek to punish the mariner by hanging the albatross around his neck. Now again, I said it in period 7, I believe, but that's very much a reflection, if you will, of responsibility, of guilt. This idea that the albatross is the burden that the mariner has to carry. So I think there's a lot going on here. Introduction to the conversational poems, which I think very much is a important idea given where we're going with this. Okay, so conversational poems, Frost at Midnight, Aeolian Harp, and the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. I will see you with the next installment of this.